Okay, so we're going to talk about independent and dependent variable today. And remember, a variable is something that is changed in a scientific experiment. There are two variables. One that you can control, that would be your x value, and one that is the result, and that would be your y, your output value. This is the same thing is true for mathematical situations. So our x value is the one we control, and what we mean by that is that we choose our x values based on what we are counting or measuring, because we are going to use either certain numbers to represent those quantities, or we're going to use every number to represent the quantity because we're measuring it. And once we know what our input values are, then we are able to calculate our results or our output values, the y values. So over here, this looks familiar to you, Dixie Royd. It's just a reminder that domain, input, and independent are all other words for x values. We're going to start seeing independent a lot more in this upcoming unit. Royd, range, output, dependent, those are all other words for the y values. So what you need to know about your independent and dependent variables is that changing the independent variable, changing that x value, is going to cause a change in your dependent variable, your y value. So you need to understand that if you change this number, your result is going to also be affected. So remember, x is always the independent variable, y is always the dependent variable. The independent variable is going to be your cause. It's going to be the thing that is changed because you control what numbers those are based on what your x values are counting or measuring on the x-axis, and that is the horizontal side. Your dependent variable, your y values, are going to be the effect because that is what is measured. That's going to be the result, and it's going to be due to whatever your x values are. On a graph, it's on the y-axis. That would be along the vertical side. So here's something you may not have seen before. This phrase right here, dependent, depends on the independent. So if you see these clue words in a word problem, that is almost as important as an equation, because they are going to tell you what your x value quantities are and what your y value quantities are. You just need to know where to look, and here's where you look. You find the words depends on, and the quantities, the units of measure before those clue words are going to be telling you what your y values are counting or measuring. Those units of measurement after your clue words are going to be telling you what your x values are. And then here's just a reminder that all of your y value words, this is where they're going to go in a graph. All your x value words, this is where they're going to go in a graph. So now we're going to actually look at some examples and figure out what our independent and dependent are. So I've got a column here of dependent and independent. So I want to remind myself that the dependent is y, the independent is x, because this is a little backwards from how we're used to seeing it. And then these are our clue words, depends on. So we've got some quantities over here. We've got who scores more points, how far you can drive, the amount of cash you have, and winner of a football game. So I want to determine not only what correct column they go in based on them being a dependent or independent variable, but I also want to determine which row they go in. So, and I want to get them in the correct order. So remember, it's got to be y depends on x. So now let's look over here. So hopefully we can see that who scores more points and the winner of a football game are going to be paired up. Those relate to each other and have a cause and effect relationship. So now I want to ask myself, what would come first? Do I need to score points first, or do I win the football game first? And hopefully you said that you need to score more points. So who scores more points is going to be your x values. Those are what the x values are measuring or counting. And if we're talking about points, we would be counting our points, which means our domain would be discrete. Which means, since we know these are our x values, that means the winner of the football game would be our dependent variable. Let's switch pins here. Winner of a football game. So the winner of a football game depends on Who scores more points? That would be the sentence you would see in a word problem, and that would clue you into what would be your X values and your Y values. So now we're going to look at the next scenario. We've got how far you can drive and the amount of gas you have. So we've got to put them in the correct column so that they're in the correct order when we read the sentence. So now I got to think, can I drive first or do I need to have gas first? And hopefully, even though you guys don't drive yet, you know that you need to have gas first. So the amount of gas is your independent variable. And that means that how far you can drive is your dependent. How far you can drive depends on the amount of gas you have. Okay, so now we're going to look at some word problems. So the first word problem I have is the junior class is selling t-shirts for a school pride fundraiser. They paid $485 to the company for the shirts. They will sell them for $12 a shirt. The relationship between the number of shirts sold and the junior's profit from the sale of the shirts can be represented by the function f of n is equal to 12n minus 485, in which n represents the number of shirts sold. Which statement is true? Okay, so if I look at my answer choices really quickly, I see this clue phrase depends on in every answer choice, which means I'm going to do exactly what we did up here in this table. I've got to put them in the right order, and it's got to be dependent, or Y depends on the independent X. So the first thing I got to go looking for is, since they use the clue words in my answer choices, I'm now going to go back up to my word problem and see what did they give me to help me figure it out. Hopefully your eyes are drawn to your function, your equation. F of n is equal to 12n minus 485. If they give you an equation, then they are giving you a clue to what your X and Y values are. So now I just got to ask myself, which letter is X in disguise? And hopefully you said N. Here is also another clue. If you keep reading after your equation, they tell you what the X variable is, what the independent variable is, N. And they also tell you what it is counting or measuring. N represents the number of shirts sold. Number of shirts sold. Okay. And we're counting those. We have to count the number of shirts. We don't measure the number of shirts. So I know that this domain is going to be discrete because we are counting our X values. Okay, so if N is X, this is telling me that all of this, F of N, all of that is really Y in disguise. And so now I just got to figure out what's my other unit of measurement I see in my problem. Well, I see dollar signs, which has to do with money. So they are trying to get a profit. So this is going to be the junior's profit. They are trying to make money. And that's, I'm not just going to put money, I need to know exactly what they are doing with the money. Is it a salary? Is it total cost? In this case, they're talking about profit. So now I want to put it in the correct sentence. Blank depends on blank. Okay. So now I just need to remember that X goes last with this phrase and Y comes first. So, well, since I've already identified my X and Y, I know that this is the number of shirts sold. And since I've identified my Y value as being the junior's profit, I know that junior's profit goes in the first blank. And now I know my sentence. So the junior's profit depends on the number of shirts sold. So let's go back up to our answer choices because we're trying to find which one is true, and let's see which one is in the correct order. So we've got junior's profit depends on number of shirts sold. It can't be A. Junior's profit depends on the number of shirts sold. It can't be B. Junior's profit, okay, here we go, depends on the number of shirts sold. C is not correct because they don't have the correct X value. D, junior's profit depends on the amount of shirts sold. Same thing as the number of shirts sold. D is our correct answer. All right, now let's look at our next Word problem. So we've got on average, Jason's Donuts can make 180 donuts in 1 hour. The function is represented by f of h is equal to 188, where h is the number of hours. Which quantity is the independent quantity? So if I read my question, they are looking for what is x counting or measuring. So I did not see my phrase depends on, which is a clue, but I did see this clue. F of h is equal to 180h. My equation is just as important as my clue words depends on. So now I'm going to ask myself, what is x in disguise? And it is h. And h is representing, and I know in my sentence where my equation is, they are going to tell me what h is measuring or counting. And here we are talking about number of hours. And so I have to ask myself, do I count hours or do I have to measure hours? And we are measuring time. So I know that my domain would be continuous and my graph would be connected. All right, so now I know that this is x in disguise. All of this has to be y in disguise, and we are talking about time and donuts, so this has to be the total number of donuts. Okay, well they did not say anything about the phrase, but we're going to go ahead and put that in order. So blank depends on blank. Okay, so I know that x goes last, so this is going to be hours. And y value comes first, so this is going to be donuts, total number of donuts. So the total number of donuts is going to depend on the number of hours that we make them. Makes sense. So now I need to figure out which one is x. Well, I know this is x in disguise, and what is this counting or measuring? The number of hours, so that's what I'm looking for my answer. A, the number of donuts made, no. The number of hours making donuts. Okay, let's keep reading. The number of customers, no. The number of employees, no. So the correct answer is